Today on Ancient DOS Games, we're doing StarMines 2, which is a good example of one of those obscure independent titles that probably not a lot of people have heard of or played, but is a good example of what one person can do when they're not being hassled by corporate pressures and don't have to rush a game out. It's a good example of what can be achieved. So, before we get too into depth of what this game has to offer, let's take a look at the game stats. StarMines 2 was released by Jari Kajala in 1992, and he hails all the way from Finland. It's a one-player overhead 360-degree shooter. It uses a 320x240x256 color Mode X graphics mode, which basically means if you're running this game on original hardware and it's not fully VGA compliant, the game might not look properly on the screen if it even shows up at all. So it's best to run this game in DOSBox unless you're using like a fully VGA compliant graphics card. It supports both PC speaker and Sound Blaster sound, though you want to check your volume levels if you choose the Sound Blaster mode, because when you die in this game, the explosion is really loud. And as for its release date, the author actually chose to release this under his own special license he called Cardware. And the idea is that if you like the game, you send the author a postcard. And his original reasoning behind this was just to get an idea of where all the people who were playing this game hailed from, but, you know, with the internet around, it's kind of an archaic idea. I don't know, it's whatever works for him, I guess, and I sent him a postcard. He's probably got it by now. And if you want to actually download his game and play it, you just go to his website, www.yarikayala.com. And he's actually been on the internet for quite a while. You consider that his game actually has an email address in it, and he released it in 1992. I mean, consider the World Wide Web has only existed since 3 years prior to that. So that makes him one of the first people online, probably. So let's talk about the gameplay. Now in StarMines 2, the basic gameplay is to just destroy all the star mines, collect all the bonusoids, and get to the end of the level. And that's pretty much it. You're just going for a high score, though you don't really have to go for a high score, because instead you can just try to survive to the end of the level, because let's face it, this game is actually really hard. Some of the difficulty comes from design choices, and is intentional, but some of the difficulty also comes from just a couple nuances about the game that you want to keep in mind while you're playing. The first thing that comes to mind are the controls. Now, the controls in this game aren't actually that bad. They're actually streamlined pretty well. You got turn left, turn right, thrust forward, fire weapons, and a braking button that stops you instantly. Though the documentation says the braking button might be kind of a cheat, but let's face it, if you don't use it, you're just going to be bouncing all over the walls and you're going to have very little control over where you go. This is mostly because of the way the turning works in this game. You can only turn in 16 different directions, and because the game runs at a frame rate of 20 frames a second, and you turn at a rate of one of those 16 directions every frame, you can literally do a full 360 in under a second. In fact, it's close to about 3/4 of a second. That's really fast turning, which means you gotta be really, really light with the controls to turn in the exact direction you want to face. And because you can only face in 16 directions, that means you have to rely more on your movement to aim at what you want to hit, rather than turning to face what you want to hit, since you can't turn very accurately, but you can move pretty accurately, if you remember to hit that stop button. That actually brings us to the options in this game, because there's 3 different options you can change, mostly between 2 settings, and you actually want to change them all from their defaults. Like the default setting for the sound mode is PC speaker, you probably want to change that to Sound Blaster. The default mode for centering is off, and you probably want to change that to on. The reason why is because if the centering is off, that means the screen doesn't scroll unless the ship is right near the edge of the screen, which means you can't really see what's coming at you with the centering mode off. So if you turn it on, the screen will actually keep your ship centered unless you reach the edges, the edges of the playing field itself. So, you know, that's a really good setting to turn on. And then the other setting you want to change from its default is to friction, which is set to on by default. You want to change that to off. And now you're probably a little confused at that because, you know, friction is what slows you down when you stop thrusting, so why would you want to turn that off? Well, it has to go back with what I've said about being able to only face in 16 different directions. Since you have to rely on your movement to get any real accuracy out of your shots, leaving the friction off allows your ship to glide at a straight and steady speed until you want to stop moving, and then you hit the stop moving button and you're facing exactly where you want to face to aim your shots and hit your target. So turn the friction off, turn the centering on, turn the sound to Sound Blaster unless for some reason you want PC speaker sounds. Or unless you want the sounds off. You can turn the sounds off as well, so there you go. And the gameplay is pretty simple. You just collect the bonusoids and shoot the StarMines. And I highly recommend you don't mix the two up, because if you shoot the bonusoids, you don't really get any points for it, and if you collect the StarMines, yeah, that happens. So make sure you get the two right. The bonusoids will always have a B on them, so that's how you know not to shoot them and to collect them instead. Though there are actually a few elements beyond these that you have to worry about. When you get to the 3rd level, you start having to worry about antimatter, turrets, and invulnerable things. Now, the antimatter is what you use to actually destroy the invulnerable things, because the antimatter can destroy pretty much anything, including yourself. So what you want to do is you want to knock the antimatter boxes around to get them into just the right spot you want to shoot them in, and then just shoot them. Though you gotta be careful, because even the enemies can shoot the antimatter boxes, and that can really screw all your plans up if you let that happen. Though in some cases it might actually be easier to just waste the life and just burn right through the enemies during your brief moment you're invulnerable for when you come back to life. But that's not really the recommended approach if you're going for a high score, so just keep that in mind. Just be careful in terms of testing the waters to see if an enemy is vulnerable or not, because some of the invulnerable enemies don't really like it when you shoot them, and instead of taking damage like a good enemy does, it releases lots of little StarMines at you at really high speed. And if you survive that ordeal, chances are they're going to bounce around the room and come back at you anyways. So, generally speaking, the way you can tell if an enemy is immune to damage, and you need to use the antimatter to destroy it, is how fast it's moving. The invulnerable enemies either don't move, or move really slowly. So that's basically how you can tell the difference. And if an enemy is moving fast and is shooting at you or something, then you know it's one you can shoot down. But the slow-moving ones, use the antimatter. Otherwise you might regret it. The turrets, on the other hand, are kind of interesting in themselves. They actually come in 3 flavors: the gray turrets, the gold turrets, and the green turrets. The gray turrets are vulnerable to your attacks, and they only take 2 hits. They don't move around. They just shoot in predictable patterns, and they're pretty easy to deal with, in most cases. Sometimes you might end up with a group of them, and it might be difficult to dodge them and shoot them properly, so in those events, usually it's just better to avoid them. Actually, for most of the turrets, it's better to avoid them, especially when you start seeing the gold and green ones. The gold ones are invulnerable. You can only destroy them with the antimatter. So, gold ones are best just avoided unless the antimatter is placed in a specific way that you can actually get a lot of them gone and then, deal with them more easily. The green ones, on the other hand, they take 3 hits to shoot down, and they actually can turn their turret and then shoot straight at you. There is a trick with dealing with the green ones, though, because the green ones can only fire in 8 directions, and you can fire in 16. So the trick to dealing with them is to position yourself where one of your special 8 directions that they can't shoot in, you can. And that way they can't hit you, but you can hit them. So it makes sense. Though another trick with dealing with some of these turrets is to, when you have the friction off, you keep moving after you stop thrusting. So you set yourself in one direction, and then fire in another direction. That way you can hit them while avoiding their shots, without having to worry about having to, stay in one spot and shoot them without being shot at. Depends on which method works the best for the situation. So as you progress through the game, you're going to notice that the difficulty steadily increases, and it does not stop. I've gotten as far as level 12, and I haven't been able to get past it yet because it is just a really hard level. And it's even titled Mission Impossible, and I can believe it. It's just so hard. But the game difficulty, at least, it increases steadily, so when you get on level 7, it's harder than all the previous levels, and when you get to level 8, it's harder than level 7, and level 9 is harder than level 8. So at least the difficulty is steady, and it progresses at a nice pace, and if you really like a challenging game where you shoot stuff, then this will provide. And each level actually varies and introduces new stuff, and, keeps it interesting. It will get frustrating, though, if this isn't your style of game, so be warned. Actually, one of the reasons why I haven't beaten this game yet is because of a rather serious bug. Apparently, sometimes when I get destroyed, I don't respawn. The game just sits me there and my ship never comes back. And I'm not really certain what causes it, because I've noticed that whenever it happens, it's because I'm firing a lot of shots and I'm near a lot of enemies that are releasing respawning StarMines. Like, there's certain enemies in this game that take lots of hits to destroy, and they release StarMines when you're near them. And I think it's a combination of dealing with those enemies and just shooting lots of shots, but whatever the case, I haven't been able to beat the game yet, and that's part of the reason why. And, you know, it's just one serious bug that affects this game, but beyond that, the game is pretty solid and plays pretty well. So, I'm not really sure what else to talk about, so let's just get into how you can get this game running best on your system. Now, the way the timing works in this game is it actually automatically calculates how much of a delay it needs in order to run at its correct frame rate, which means that it's actually going to be automatically calculating that at the same time DOSBox is automatically calculating how fast it wants to go. So the two kind of conflict with each other, so you want to set a fixed cycles count just to make sure the game runs at the right speed. I recommend 20,000, that's the setting I use, and it's the setting that seems to work best. As for using the graphics filters actually make this game look much better. Like, I mean, I use the HQ filters, and because of all the 45-degree angled lines in this game, it makes them look very smooth, and it makes for a very good-looking game when you use the graphics filters. And even though I prefer the HQ filters, you know, any of the filters that you like best will generally make this game look better. And this is actually a perfect example of a game for using the key mapper to add joystick support. This game does not have joystick support built into it, so by using DOSBox's key mapper, you can map the keyboard keys that you would normally use in this game to a joystick, and there you go, joystick support in a game that doesn't have it. Just one of the many reasons why I think using DOSBox to play these old games is much better than using the actual hardware. And that concludes this episode of Ancient DOS Games. Stay tuned for episode 5, where I'll be reviewing a first-person shooter where you not only fly through narrow tunnels, but also over vast landscapes. Got any ideas, anyone? Any guesses at all? Got any guesses, just send them to adg@pixelships.com and maybe I'll mention your name in the next episode. So, that's all. Stay tuned.